The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network's Structural Racism Toolkit. Structural racism in the U.S. today. Environmental racism. Structural racism forced people of color to live in places that were less safe. These places were also less healthy. Often, white people wanted to live in the healthiest and safest places. Sometimes the government wanted to take the land where people of color lived. Then, people of color were forced to leave. Sometimes people of color would have to sell their homes. They would often not get as much money as the homes were worth. They would only get unfair deals. Sometimes white communities forced people of color out of their communities with violence, and sometimes both happened at the same time. People of color sometimes accepted unfair deals because of the violence. They were forced to move to stay safe. Then, people of color often needed to move to more crowded places. These places also had less money for new homes because of racist housing policies. This meant they weren't very good places to live. They didn't get as much money for parks and trees. This made these places less healthy to live in. A lot of times, the government or businesses would pollute the environment in these places. This is because the people living there didn't have as much money. Without a lot of money, it was harder to say no. Living near a lot of pollution hurts people. It was harder for people of color to get the government to help them. This is because of structural racism. One example is building highways. The government made a lot of highways in the 1950s and 60s. It made these highways so that people could go to the cities for work. A lot of the communities that highways were made to help were white communities. They were communities that were segregated by federal housing policy. The government would build a highway through a community of color. The government would build through communities of color on purpose. The government would avoid white communities. Many people were forced to move away from their communities. Some people stayed, but now they had a highway in the middle of their community. Living next to a highway is hard. It is unhealthy. Highways make a lot of pollution and noise. It's harder to walk around in a community where there is a highway. Highways made a lot of communities of color worse places to live. Another example of environmental racism is reservations. Before European settlers came to the U.S., other people lived here. The people that lived here before Europeans are indigenous. Indigenous people in the U.S. are also called Native Americans or American Indians. White people wanted the land indigenous people lived on. They stole the land. They killed many indigenous people. The U.S. government forced indigenous people to leave their homes. They forced indigenous people to move to reservations. Reservations are areas that are set aside for indigenous people to live. Reservations are land that white people didn't want to live in. This land is difficult to live on. Many reservations are in deserts. It is hard to grow food in deserts. The U.S. government also uses nearby land for other things that hurt the environment. They build oil pipelines. They do tests that pollute the area. This is dangerous. White people don't want these things happening near where they live, so this happens near reservations. It hurts indigenous people. It pollutes their land. Learn more about environmental racism in our toolkit, Racial Disparities in Community Living. Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. For more information, visit our website, autisticadvocacy.org.